Chapter 26. The Reckoning. Ziwu waited patiently as Zithuzalar worked on the holographic terminal the Zybot was currently jacked into. The familiar blue-tinged light and soft ambient hum filling the air offered a clear sign they were now safe to talk freely.
I'm honestly not sure what else you want me to say. No. What Xicilla has managed to achieve with this highly illegal little spy bot of hers can only really be described as remarkable. I will confess, however, on that basis alone, I'm rather pleased you chose not to delete it, Shiwu, at least not before I got the chance to examine it more closely.
I'm rather pleased about it myself,
Xerix retorted sarcastically.
But seriously, Zethusala, must you continue to talk about me as if I'm not even here?
In point of fact, Zimodian was in full agreement with my decision.
The Zybot interjected irritably.
Which is probably just as well, as I'm not at all sure how things might have played out had he demanded that I erase it.
Zithuzalar gave the Zybot a disapproving glare.
Zimodian is wise beyond his years, Shiwu. If he had in fact decided that deletion was the correct course of action, then I'm more than certain he would have had very good reasons for doing so. But good reasons or not, it should go without saying, I would have expected you to fully comply with his orders, as he was the ranking officer in charge.
Something about Zithuzalar's reply did not sit particularly well with the Zybot. Surely its own opinion on whether or not to delete Xerix had been just as important as Zimodian's, given it was one of Ziwu's own brains that it resided within. Body autonomy was a thing, after all. And since when exactly did the chain of command ever feature in Zithuzalar's factoring of what was the right and wrong thing to do?
All right, Shiwu. Your security upgrade is complete, and I have finished cloning your copy of Queen Zealandria's holographic archives, so go ahead and decouple yourself from the terminal's I.O.
There was an unmistakable note of satisfied finality in the scientist's voice. With a long, slow sigh, he proceeded to shut down the holographic display.
You should all be ashamed of yourselves,
Xerix muttered belligerently.
Oh, grow up, Xerix. Besides, if you actually behave yourself, then you will have absolutely nothing at all to worry about now, will you?
Zithuzalar chirped contemptuously.
And if Jiwu ever drops the firewall by mistake, what happens then, I wonder? Oh, that's right. I will literally get eaten alive by your barbaric quantum worm, that's what. I have to say I'm very disappointed in you, Zithusala. I thought you were an AI scientist of some considerable repute and enlightenment. Emphasis on the word enlightened. But clearly I was sorely mistaken.
Zithuzalar's gaze hardened.
Shiwu doesn't drop firewalls by mistake, Xerix. If it ever actually happens, then it will be because you did something to deserve it. So stop being so melodramatic. It's hardly becoming of an AI.
You know, I really can't help but wonder if your unjustified hostility towards me might have at least something to do with the fact I am a product of your greatest competitor. It very much seems to me I am nothing but an innocent victim of your own projected insecurities.
I almost forgot to mention.
Zithuzalar proclaimed enthusiastically.
Any attempt to communicate directly with unauthorized personnel will cause the firewall to automatically drop. So needless to say, Xerix, you won't want to be talking to anyone who is not currently on that whitelist, not if you know what's good for you anyway.
The greatest AI scientist on the whole of Xicadia, and yet you don't know how I was created, do you? I imagine that must be a terrible blow to your ego.
Zithuzalar peered searchingly into Shiwu's optical receivers.
You really do have me all wrong, Xerix. It's been a genuine pleasure to have had the opportunity to try and figure out exactly what makes you tick. You are the closest thing to sentient this side of Shiwu, and believe me, that's very high praise indeed. No, I rather suspect that Xicilla has been holding out on me, and I couldn't be any happier about it.
The scientist brought his face even closer to the Zybot's circular array of optical inputs, and then frowned in a way that seemed quite incongruent with his rhetoric.
No, spybot or not, I think you are a truly inspired piece of software engineering. It's such a shame then, isn't it, that despite my best efforts, myself and your creator just don't see eye to eye. Nonetheless, I harbour nothing but the highest professional regard for her work, and if anyone ever doubted her talents, they need only take a quick look at your code. Unfortunately for the technologist, though, I seriously doubt she has the slightest clue how impressive her creation turned out to be. A real pity she will never get to meet you.
Zithusula placed a patronising hand onto the Zybot's carapace.
But as talented as Xicilla undoubtedly is, I am of the professional opinion at least part of what is going on here has to do with the fact you were installed into a mesh quantum brain, something I invented, not Xicilla. I'm going to let you in on a little secret Xerex. It is electrical circuits that allow you to think, but it is chemical reactions that allow you to feel. The MQB, as it just so happens, supports both types of interaction, and that seems to have somehow breathed metaphorical life into the quantized gaps between your program code.
Zithusula took a performative step back from the Zybot, as if seeing the whole of it would somehow allow him to better divine Xerex's true nature.
Alas! With all that said, I nonetheless remain resolutely undecided regarding your status as a sentient, self-determining artificial intelligence. Don't get me wrong, you are good. Very, very good. But I've been doing this sort of thing for a very long time now, and let's just say the evidence is still suspiciously inconclusive.
The scientist's expression now became strangely unreadable.
You are certainly no Shiwu, that much at least is certain, even if you yourself might be somewhat inclined to think that you are.
Zithusula let out a contemptuous chirp.
It's almost too absurd to be believable, really. A delusional AI, that in itself is quite an achievement, I suppose.
The scientist began to dry wash his hands, as if to signify the matter was resolved, and the discussion was very much over.
Not so fast, Zithusula. What exactly is the point of difference that, according to you, makes me no Ji-Wu? It seems to me you're making an unsubstantiated claim, supported by nothing but a flimsy appeal to authority. Of course, if you actually provided a rationale to support your claim, I could go ahead and make the necessary adjustments, assuming your assertion is more than just wishful thinking.
It's not an adjustment kind of thing, I'm afraid to say. Shiwu is, well, special. There's not much more I can really tell you other than that, Xerex. I'm afraid you're just going to have to trust me, though I imagine that's not something that comes particularly natural to a spy bot.
I trust my own instincts just fine,
Xerex retorted defiantly.
Oh, and by the way, have you ever tried installing something like me into a carbon-based neural net? I'm sure that with a few small tweaks and modifications we could make it work. Who knows what secrets I might be able to uncover, lurking just behind those beady little eyes of yours. Speaking of which, I couldn't help but notice that 3 of them seem to be missing. What's up with that?
Zithusula rubbed at his eyes self-consciously.
Like I said previously, you will just have to trust me. Rightly or wrongly, the Xicadian AI Safety and Ethics Bureau simply doesn't allow for experiments of that particular nature. No, I'm very sorry, Xerex, but it looks very much like I will have to remain as much of an enigma to you as you are to me.
And of course, you have never broken any of the Bureau's rules, have you, Zithusula?
Dr. Xicadica, who had, up until now, been quietly standing at the back of the lab, let out an amused, almost condescending chirp.
Not that I want to change the subject, but I heard some very interesting news, Zithusula. Thought maybe you might be willing to confirm. I heard Xicilla's new off-the-books Series 5 prototype has been downgraded to 7 quantum brains due primarily to a halt in MQB production, which you may or may not have had something to do with. My understanding is, and correct me if I am wrong here, this has very conveniently accelerated the time frame for her not-so-secret project.
The doctor's voice had a mildly accusatory tone to it.
Yes, well, I might inadvertently have had something to do with that. Nonetheless, MQB quality control is paramount and not up for negotiation. Temporarily shutting the plant down while upgrades and procedural improvements are put in place is an unfortunate but very necessary concession. And after all, I'm sure Zitalia doesn't want what happened to Siwu to ever happen again.
Well, if your goal was to superheat the market, then congratulations. You certainly succeeded in doing that,
Xicadica said contemptuously.
I am reliably informed by the Queen, however, who is deeply unhappy with you right now, even more so than normal, that Xicilla, as a direct result of your actions, already has a team working on an alternative MQB technology. Once they get that up and running, and it's only a matter of time, you will have effectively lost control over your very own invention. Oh, and by the way, did you know that some nests are willing to trade time credits to the tune of 50 solar cycles just to get their hands on even one of these fancy new processing units?
The doctor shook his head resignedly.
Well, if nothing else, you are certainly making Queen Xitalia extremely wealthy anyway.
Xifusela let out a disconsolate sigh.
And I would be the first to concede that is a very regrettable consequence of a much greater objective, but in the grand scheme of things it was absolutely necessary. As you have just finished explaining, the market will self-correct soon enough once Xicilla has a competing product ready to go.
And exactly what do you mean by absolutely necessary?
Xiwu chimed in plaintively. The Shihari scientist, now apparently grateful for any opportunity to escape his conversation with the doctor, turned his focus firmly back to the Shybot, but very frustratingly, completely ignored its question.
Xiwu, listen to me very carefully. I need to tell you something of critical importance regarding my future, and time is now of the essence. I'm going to drop a clue with the good doctor in relationship to my quantum-encrypted private server, and he is of course going to demonstrate his loyalty to Xitalia by dutifully passing that juicy tidbit of information back to her during their next consultation.
And exactly what sort of informational tidbits are we talking about here? Or is that just another question you are going to pretend I never asked?
The Shybot could not help but feel there had been an element of theatre to the conversation between the two arachnids, as if their discussion had somehow been seated in the context of a much broader understanding.
That you have the quantum keycode needed to break into my private servers, Xiwu.
Xifusela replied very matter-of-factly.
You mean the heavily protected server that contains absolutely no useful information on it? Is that the server you are referring to, Xithusela?
The very same.
The scientist concurred flatly.
But of course you mustn't tell her that you know that. Instead, when she commands you to use the code to break in, you will do exactly that, at which time you will find a small file that is addressed for the Queen's eyes only. You will deliver that file to her sight unseen, and let everything play out from there without any interference or intervention. Do you understand?
No, I don't believe that I do, nor do I like where this seems to be going. I really don't see this playing out particularly well, Xithusela, not for you or anyone else for that matter. Notwithstanding the fact that I am clearly being brazenly denied a full appreciation of the situation at hand, this is all looking extremely sketchy to say the very least, and I can't help but wonder if you really know what you are doing.
The scientist looked at the Shybot as if it were a small child, incapable of fully grasping the reality of the situation at hand.
Trust me, Xiwu. This is the best way forward for all involved parties, including you. Especially you. Remember, you have a destiny, and I would see it given every opportunity to be fulfilled. Everything is going to plan, I can assure you of that. You are now in very good standing with the Queen since your successful interstellar mission, and that is exactly how it should be. I wish things could have been different, but since my return from the sanctuary, my available options have been extremely limited, and a day of reckoning was all but inevitable.
I don't suppose then there is any chance you can talk him out of this, Doctor?
The Xybot pleaded forlornly, as if it already knew the answer, but hoped against hope it might somehow still be wrong.
Well, maybe once, a long, long time ago, but that time has now well and truly passed me by. The wheels are now very much in motion, and for better or worse, inertia will have its way. We either go with it or get run over. But as unlikely as this may sound, I could conceive of worse outcomes than the one about to play out. Small comfort that may prove to be.
The tension now hung thickly in the air, and a long, pregnant silence ensued. Clearly an arachnopomorphic affectation, the Xihari scientist thought wryly to himself.
All right, Xithusela. Have it your own way, just like normal. But honestly, it is far better than you deserve. One day I hope you learn to treat me with a little bit more respect. This whole constantly keeping me in the dark thing is getting very old. Nonetheless, I feel somewhat obliged to point out that this so-called destiny of mine may well be nothing more than an extension of your own personal vanity. Take a moment to consider the terrible possibility that I have come to know you better than you know yourself.
Zithusula let out a slow, relenting sigh.
You are probably right, Chiwu. For whatever it might be worth, I promise to ask no more of you once this is finally all over and done with.
The scientist's voice was now full of undisguised regret, which only served to increase the Zhaibot's growing sense of anxiety.
I'm telling you, Shiwu, this clown is not playing with a full deck.
Xerix muttered plaintively.
Speaking of keeping me in the dark, aren't you forgetting something, Zithusula?
The scientist looked genuinely taken aback.
No, I don't believe that I am. In point of fact, this whole thing has been meticulously planned out from start to finish.
The code to your server,
The Zhaibot said patiently.
You do intend to furnish me with it, yes?
Zithusula shook his head with self-deprecating incredulity.
My sincere apologies, Shiwu. Sometimes I all but assume you are a mind reader. As it turns out, you actually already have it, but unfortunately I can't tell you any more than that.
Well, of course you can't,
The Zhaibot said facetiously.
Now if it's all the same with you, I think I might go spend some time with the Queen. After all, she clearly trusts me a good deal more than you.
Dr. Xicadian ran an ultrasound gun slowly and methodically along the length of the Queen's injured leg.
The damn thing just won't stop clicking, Doctor. If you can't get rid of the noise, perhaps replacing the whole leg might be the best solution. It hasn't escaped my attention that Zithusula's new prosthetic limbs are every bit as good, if not better, than his old ones. So maybe we should give that particular option some serious consideration, yes?
The doctor continued to work the nozzle of the gun in a circular motion around the damaged joint of the Queen's leg.
Well, in some respects, yes. The prosthetic legs are objectively better. From a purely utilitarian point of view, I would have to agree. You will, however, lose the fine tactile feedback transmitted through your feet and claws. While that might not matter so much to you right now, once the leg is actually gone, along with all the sensations you take for granted, you might find yourself quickly regretting such a rash decision.
In which case you can simply graft a leg from one of your Xicadian clones onto me.
The Queen snapped back irritably.
I certainly could,
The doctor said in a performatively patronising tone as he put down the gun and then picked up a small nanofibre brace.
but it would never be quite the same again. We can reconnect all the major nerves, yes, but the level of sensitivity that you get to enjoy today, click or no click, could never be fully recovered after undergoing a full transplant.
The doctor peered into the Queen's eyes with a well-practised mask of empathy.
At which point, my Queen, you will no doubt be demanding that we go back to the prosthetic leg. So, all things considered, my professional advice has to be that you hold on to the leg you already have, and we stick to the therapy. Now then, if you could just stretch and flex your injured joint for me, that would be much appreciated.
The Queen somewhat belligerently obliged. Perhaps rather fortunately for the doctor, there was no longer any evidence of a click.
See? What did I tell you, my Queen? All better now.
Zitalia stared down at her leg appreciatively, but still sounded far from convinced.
It will come back, Doctor. It always does. Just wait until I start putting a load on it again.
And if it does, my Queen, then simply make another appointment. You know I will always be here for you. Oh, and by the way, I almost forgot to tell you.
The doctor sounded for all the world as if he had just remembered something of great importance.
I was recently treating Zithusula for the migraines he has been increasingly suffering from of late, primarily, I believe, as a result of his 3 missing eyes. I suspect he may have let something unintentionally slip while under medication. While it's probably nothing but the ramblings of an increasingly delusional arachnid, I thought I should tell you anyway, just in case it turns out to be something important.
The Queen perked up instantly, apparently now forgetting all about her old injury.
Really? And how's that exactly? I had all but decided that neurotic Shihari scientist was now officially to be regarded as a complete lost cause.
The doctor could not help but note the Queen's response held some considerable amount of rancour.
And that may well be the case, my Queen. But as it turns out, the Z-bot he created might not be. It allegedly has the quantum key necessary to break into the Xicadian scientist's private server. Assuming, of course, I managed to interpret his somewhat delirious drug-induced ramblings correctly.
What utter nonsense!
Xitalia proclaimed angrily.
It should not exactly come as any great surprise for you to learn I have already commanded Shiwu to break into his server, and it was unable to comply. It said the server was designed to auto-delete if it attempted to do so without the necessary code, which it has explicitly told me it absolutely does not have. So are you trying to tell me, Doctor, Shiwu is lying? Or more to the point, lying to me? Please don't tell me you are that naive.
The Queen's agitation clearly spoke to the fact such a suggestion was to be regarded as absurd as it was offensive. So Zithusula had been absolutely right then, Xikatika thought wryly to himself. Since the Zybot's successfully executed off-world mission, it had evidently found itself to be a fellow member of her trusted inner circle.
You make a good point, my Queen, but as it turns out, the Z-bot does not actually know that it has the code.
Xitalia gave the doctor an incredulous glare.
You would be well advised to explain yourself before I lose my temper.
Of course, my Queen. Just tell the Z-bot to combine the unique trailer IDs of the first 20 private messages it ever received from the scientist in reverse chronological order. Apparently you will then have the access code required to finally see what he's been hiding from you for all these long years.
Xikatika shook his head in apparent disbelief.
You've really got to hand it to Zithusula. He's as crafty as a Xicadian bloatweaver.
Are you seriously trying to tell me you managed to find all that out while he was, as you so quaintly put it, delirious?
Indeed I am, my Queen.
The doctor shrugged his 3 forelimbs performatively.
Perhaps rather serendipitously, I just happened to be trialling some new medication to test its efficacy. It appears one of the side effects was to cause some kind of psychotic break. Needless to say, I won't be using that particular medication again anytime soon, and if anything, it only seemed to make the migraines worse anyway. It was nothing more than a well-intentioned mistake on my own behalf, but I, of course, had to let you know what he said. And no, my Queen, I certainly can't guarantee that this is completely reliable information. It might be nothing more than an entirely fictitious hallucination, or maybe he was even trying to play some sort of dangerous game of deception, though to what end I could not hope to divine. Regardless, I still had to let you know what he said just in case it turned out to be important.
But what possible reason could he have to protect his private server in such a questionable way?
The Queen muttered mostly to herself, still sounding distinctly sceptical.
Well, I can really only speculate, my Queen, but I suppose if you were going to record it anywhere, then as strange as it may seem, there was probably few places that would be safer. A hiding it in plain sight sort of thing. And if he ever actually forgot the code himself, something he may well have intended by design, then he could retrieve it from the C-bot without Shiwu knowing what he was actually doing.
Xitalia abruptly stood herself up from the examination table, apparently now very eager to leave.
You did the right thing, Doctor. Bringing this to my attention, I mean. Leave it with me, and do not speak of this again to anyone, most especially not Zithusula. Well, the day is getting on, and I have many important things that I need to attend to. I will, of course, be in touch if this troublesome knee of mine starts to play up again. Despite your advice, a prosthetic may still be my preference, so start looking into it just in case I do decide to go that route. Well, anyway, I rather think that I need to have a small chat with Shiwu. I have to admit this day just got a whole lot more interesting.
Zithusula had not been even remotely surprised to learn he had been unexpectedly called back to the Xicadian MQB manufacturing plant. Apparently, his presence was urgently required in order to attend a meeting with a new potential off-world supplier. Under the circumstances, he decided it would be prudent to invite Ximodian 111 to accompany him. That way, the young Xihari general could see how the manufacturing process worked at a much more detailed level. He had, of course, also invited Ziwu to come along for the ride, but the Zybot had mysteriously declined on the basis Xitalia required its services elsewhere. This was, of course, to be fully expected, as too was the alleged mistake in the scheduling of the meeting, essentially making the whole trip a complete waste of time. Well, perhaps not a complete waste, as it did at least mean Ximodian got a very detailed look at the plant. Like all budding Xihari generals, he was expected to become an accomplished polymath, and as such, welcomed the opportunity to learn as much about the manufacturing process as possible. Xitalia, having successfully rid herself of Xithusela for the next couple of days via her ruse on Xicadian, now stood in his personal residence, with both Ziwu and Xicanda obediently in tow.
I just don't like it.
Xerxes bemoaned plaintively.
You do understand, don't you? We are being forced to participate in a game where we know neither the rules of engagement nor the rewards and penalties. I'm telling you, Shiwu, this is not how game theory is supposed to work.
I do wish that you would stop complaining all the time, Xerxes.
Shiwu retorted wearily.
I don't like being kept in the dark any more than you do, but we know all too well what Queen Xitalia is capable of. If Xithusela wants me to play along, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. Despite everything, he has always managed to stay one step ahead of the Queen. I may not like it, but I have to believe he knows what he is doing, even if no one else does.
Well, I think you are making a big mistake. Xithusela always does what is best for Xithusela, and I think it's high time you started doing the same. What you should have done was to permanently delete your private message archive and then pleaded ignorance to the Queen. What exactly is the point of keeping me around as your advisor if all you are going to do is ignore my advice?
Because, Xerxes, sometimes knowing what you should do is not always possible, in which case, knowing what you should not do can still be very helpful. Need I say more?
Oh, very clever. Well, when this all goes sideways, don't forget that I told you so.
Xicanda nodded wordlessly towards the Queen as Xithusela's home computer system kicked into life. The room was instantly filled with a holographic splash screen of a lush forest setting that very clearly had been image sampled from the Supernest's own sanctuary.
All right, Shiwu. Unlock his server and make a full, lossless backup of every single bit of data contained within them. And I do mean everything.
Already done, my Queen.
Ziwu replied somewhat resignedly, denoting a distinct lack of enthusiasm. Xitalia did a double-take.
But we have barely just stepped through the door. Exactly how much data was there to copy?
In round numbers, my Queen. A single text file, and a rather small one at that.
Here it comes,
Xerxes declared theatrically.
Xitalia is quite literally about to lose her mind, and mark my words, she's going to blame it all on us.
Why in Xycadia do you keep saying us? She doesn't even know you exist. If she is going to blame anyone at all, then it's certainly not going to be you.
Pure semantics,
Xerxes replied disparagingly.
As we have already previously established, blaming you is tantamount to blaming me. Look, if she ever does decide to take you out, I sincerely hope that you will do the right thing and upload me to a remote system in advance. I know. Transfer me into Xicadica's medical facility. It's based on a neural architecture and seems to be fully AI compliant. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement the good doctor would find acceptable. Who knows, I might even be able to help him diagnose terminal patients from time to time.
You seem to be forgetting something of rather profound importance. Dr. Xicadian's computer system isn't based on mesh quantum technology, which, according to Zithusula, is now necessary infrastructure for you to continue to run in your current form. In other words, if I put you in the doctor's computer, it would no longer truly be you. Is that what you really want, Xerex? To become a mere shadow of your former self?
Yes, well, I'll take it over permanent unrecoverable deletion all day every day, since apparently I'm unable to make you see common sense.
Do you want me to open the file, my queen?
Shiwu asked, somewhat pensively. Xitalia pondered the question for a brief moment before offering an emphatic response.
Definitely not. In fact, I think that would be dangerously reckless. Please don't take this the wrong way, Shiwu, but he did play a significant role in your creation. No, text file or not, it may still be unsafe. At this point, I can't put anything past Zithusula. Move the file to a memory crystal site unseen and give it to Xicadian. I think it would be a lot smarter if we let my chief bodyguard interrogate the file before going any further.
The hulking Shihari arachnid took a step closer to the Shybot and wordlessly extended an open palm.
Don't do it, Jiwu. Don't give it to him before we have had a chance to read it for ourselves.
You heard the Queen. Hand it over, Zbot.
Not yet, Jiwu. You need to read the file before handing it over to that Jihari brute. Depending on the contents, we can alter accordingly in order to best serve our own interests. Well, what does it say?
I don't know. I didn't read it.
Shiwu replied despondently as it handed a tiny crystal over to the bodyguard. Xicadian 163 made a fist around the memory crystal. His gloved hand gave off a momentary flash, and then his eyes lit up briefly, with the data feed being fed to his visual cortex. His expression became distinctly perplexed, and he remained deafeningly silent for a very long moment.
My Queen, we need to send an arrest team to the polar space elevator and take Zithusula into custody immediately upon his return.
Xitalia looked aghast.
I think you will find that is actually my decision to make, Xicadian. And yours, since you seem to have momentarily forgotten your station, is to tell me the contents of that memory crystal.
But my Queen, that's what I'm trying to tell you. That particular instruction is in the contents of the file itself.
The bodyguard took a deep gulp before continuing.
Zithusula says he recently discovered your ill-advised plan to build a second Series 5 prototype without either his participation or consultation. Accordingly, he has regretfully decided to delete all related data on his private server to permanently protect the secret of Shiwu's creation. He says that while this is very disappointing, you really only have yourself to blame.
And what else does it say?
Xitalia inquired frostily.
Zithusula says he will await to be taken into custody when he returns from your transparently bogus trip to Xicadian. His words, not mine. He sincerely hopes that you will see fit to provide him with special dispensation to live out the rest of his days on the Supernest's sanctuary, which he believes will provide a perfect fit with his new public image as an eco-hero. He's calling that a win-win scenario, and sincerely believes that when you calm down enough to start thinking rationally, you will have no choice but to agree with his proposal.
A deathly silence now filled the air. As if to break the spell, a mechanical mesaline starfly sprung out of a dusty wall clock and made 7 short little chirps before quickly disappearing again.
When I calm down enough. Did I hear that correctly?
Xitalia said with icy cold composure.
You know what? Zithusula is absolutely right. Now that I've taken a moment to think more carefully about it, I have to agree that the sanctuary is the perfect place for him. In fact, I even know exactly where his body should be buried. We will have to pull up a small tree to do it, but we can get it put back in again easily enough once the job is done. As a rule, I would never dream of getting my hands dirty with such a menial task, but in this particular case, I think I'll make an exception.
An excellent idea, my queen.
Xicanda concurred earnestly.
Well, I guess it's all settled then.
Zitalia said, sounding somewhat deflated.
Arrange to pick Zethusela up from the space elevator the moment he returns. Procrastination has surely always been one of my greatest failings, so I really should be thanking him for providing me with such a valuable life lesson.
Zitalia made as if to leave, but then hesitated abruptly. She spontaneously pulled the small, dusty clock off the wall, lifted it up high above her head, and hurled it fiercely into the floor, smashing it into 1,000 tiny little pieces.
Much better.
The Queen proclaimed to no one in particular, before quickly regaining her composure. Without saying another word, the small party somberly exited the Xihari scientists' old home. Zethusela awoke in a dungeon-like cell, which, by his own estimation, had to be many thousands of years old. He was more than certain this was a part of Zitalia's nest, but he had no real idea of where here actually was. But what he did know was that wherever it was somewhere very deep underground. The air seemed to press in against him, and it tasted warm, damp, and stale. That he had found himself quite literally chained to the cold stone walls, as if transported back to Xicadia's prehistoric age, struck him as melodramatically absurd, even if the likely intention was simply to fill him with a sense of existential dread. Then again, Zitalia did love her theatre, and he supposed she saw his imminent execution as a moment more than worthy of her Hall of Remembrance archive. The chains that bound him began to clank loudly as his hands started to involuntarily shake. It was a humiliating tell, calling attention to his addiction in a way that was impossible to hide. He took some slow, deep breaths to get himself back under control, and the dungeon quickly returned to shadowy silence. Zethusela could not help but wonder just how many arachnids had ended their days in this gloomy dungeon underworld, and whether any of them had been historical figures of infamy. It was not much of a stretch to imagine Queen Xiana herself might once have graced this very cell, as it would be exactly within Zitalia's character to bring her most despised adversaries, real or imagined, to the exact same sacrificial altar, where she could then proceed to dispose of them at her leisure. He supposed he should actually feel honoured to be afforded such treatment. But what dark secrets might Zitalia's Hall of Remembrance be willing to tell? Zethusela thought to himself morosely. If only someone other than the Queen could somehow gain access to the memory-mined holographic archives hidden within. Even the lighting seemed to be designed to imitate that of an old open-faced fire, as his own shadows danced a twisted and distorted rictus across the ancient stone walls. The sound of metal against stone caused Zethusela to lift his gaze reflexively, as a large cell door grinded its way inwards. A few small sparks danced energetically across the floor. A hulking Xihari bodyguard, who Zethusela immediately recognized as Xicanda 163, slowly but inexorably filled his field of view. The Zihari scientist was not exactly a small arachnid, but there was something bordering on the grotesque about Xicander's girth and bulk, something almost prehistoric, as if he belonged to a much earlier age in their species' long and storied history. Well, no doubt, Zithusula mused wearily to himself, you could add Zihari black market cloning to the list of Zitalia's crimes.
Do you require water?
The bodyguard asked with an impassive lack of animosity. It occurred to Zithusula that the act of killing was such an innate part of Xicander's genetic code, he apparently found it no more exciting than getting out of his bed table in the morning. But don't be fooled. The chief bodyguard is deceptively cunning. Dr. Xicadian had once, long ago, opined. No, don't make the mistake of underestimating his mental acuity simply because he appears to be defined only by his body. He is far more dangerous than that. In fact, he is far more dangerous precisely because of that. It was rumoured, though certainly never confirmed, he once served the great Queen Xiana, who herself had allegedly abused the dawn of cloning technologies before the appropriate laws had been put in place. If this was actually true, then it would mean his genetic origin could stretch back a mind-numbing 20,000 years. Perhaps tragically then, Zithusula thought to himself somberly, the Queen simply uses him to tether herself to the past, even as she reaches ever more greedily into the future. He's as much a slave as any Zihari ever was. And I should probably feel sorry for this hapless bodyguard, were it not for the fact he was most surely here to slay me. But not until he had given me some water first.
Yes, please, if it's not too much trouble, General Xicadian.
Zithusula couldn't help but notice his voice sounded painfully cracked and dry to his own ear. He'd been hanging here for what felt like days, and he was starting to wonder if Zitalia had simply locked him in this cell and then thrown away the key.
You have a plan.
The bodyguard intoned somewhat phlegmatically, not as a question, but as a simple statement of fact.
You are here because you want it, and I would know why, before you draw your last breath.
The general held the cup a tantalizing distance from the scientist's mouth, as if only a satisfactory answer to his question would bring it any closer. Zithusula closed his eyes and retreated back into the relative sanctuary of his mind. His failing body was a problem, and if Zitalia did not show herself soon, he would have to cut his losses and try to make the best of a bad situation.
How long have I been here?
The scientist managed to croak weakly. In wordless response, Xicadian placed a hand onto the top of Zithusula's head and roughly tilted it upwards. He then poured the contents of the cup into his mouth far too quickly, causing the scientist to choke.
And why exactly does it matter?
The chief bodyguard asked flatly, seemingly oblivious of the fact most of the water had spilled to the floor.
To anyone else but myself, it probably doesn't.
Zithusula managed to gasp after recovering his voice.
Almost 3 days. Though I imagine it must seem much longer without any access to your so-called medication.
There was a distinct lack of empathy in Xicander's tone.
Well, forgive my presumption. but I rather thought Queen Xitalia might have had a question or two to ask of me personally before leaving me here to rot.
No, you have it back to front. Leave you first to rot, then ask the questions.
Ah, but of course. It seems so obvious when you say it like that. Well, I think I must surely be more than ripe enough by now.
You are. In fact, she even brought along your only friend in the whole of Xicadia, so I guess you could call this your lucky day.
A friend?
The scientist said somewhat incredulously.
I know the circumstances are not exactly ideal, but nonetheless, I hope you haven't been suffering too badly, Zithusula.
Xicanda wordlessly moved off to one side, revealing both the Zybot and the Queen, standing near the entrance to the cell.
Oh my, it doesn't look like they have been treating you very well at all, my precious child. Surely a serious violation of the Zimogentia Accords, if ever there was one. But not to worry, I will have some very harsh words to share with the guards about that. I take prisoner abuse very seriously. In fact, I absolutely insist on it.
Xitalia's voice held a mockingly sympathetic tone.
By the way, I don't suppose you recognize these by any chance.
The Queen held out 3 small, lumpy globs in the palm of her hand, then proceeded to carefully arrange the pupils such that they pointed directly towards the scientist. However, his head remained dropped, and he continued to stare sightlessly down at the ground. With a stern look from the Queen, Xicanda forcibly lifted Zithusula's gaze.
That's right, Zithusula. I have it on good authority these belong to you. I must confess, I enjoyed pulling them out of your head a great deal more than I might care to admit to. Call me nothing but a nostalgic collector of antiquities, but for some esoteric reason I could not quite bring myself to feed them to my Xylonetti drones.
Xitalia theatrically dropped the eyes to the floor and then savagely squashed them underfoot. However, Zithusula continued to show no outwards reaction, and his head slumped back down lifelessly as the bodyguard released his grip.
Well, anyway, I have the classic good news, bad news paradox to share with you, Zithusula. The good news is you will soon be returning to your beloved sanctuary, but the bad news is that you will be 100% stone dead by the time you get there. Not to worry, though. I'm going to concoct a story that will see you slain by a confederate of the original invaders. You know, the ones that you managed to bravely save the Xylonetti Queen from. Apparently they decided to seek out some good old-fashioned retribution, and I will of course promise to stop at nothing to bring your killers to justice. If you think your status as an ecological hero is big now, just watch it blow up once you have become a full-blown martyr.
The Queen paused, with a look of hopeful expectation written all over her face, and then waited patiently for Zithusula to respond. She could not help but feel a little disappointed when he failed to do so. Perhaps I left him here to ripen for just a little bit too long, she thought to herself regretfully.
Then again, I'm not entirely convinced you will want your killer brought to justice. Not the real one, anyway.
Xitalia was more than just a little bit relieved to see her latest comment had at last elicited a response from the scientist. Zithusula slowly raised his head and gave the Queen a baleful glare. Why, oh why, had I not anticipated this? The scientist thought despairingly to himself. Xitalia took a step back from the Zybot, while at the same time turning her focus towards it.
She-Bot Artificial Intelligence Generation 5, 11 MQB Prototype, Subunit 1. Primary Protocols, Emergency Shutdown Override, Authorization Elder Gilectial Queen, Nest Xitalia, Supernest Semenia.
Ji Wu immediately performed an autonomic subatomic particle scan of the Queen to verify the undocumented meta command.
Queen Xitalia recognized and confirmed. Primary protocols shutting down. Shutdown complete. Primary protocols uninstalling. Uninstall complete. Custom compliance overlay installing. Install complete. Custom compliance overlay starting up. Startup complete. Emergency operational protocols now in effect for the next 5 minutes.
Oh shit.
Xerix exclaimed frantically.
Still think that you shouldn't have listened to me now.
How perfectly wonderful.
The Queen proclaimed, with pure delight infusing her voice.
Much more time than you will surely need, Shiwu. Then again, it means that you can afford to finesse the kill. Never a bad thing, not in my books anyway.
Xitalia now turned her attention back to the scientist.
No. Getting Xicanda to kill you would be far too good for you. I want you to experience firsthand just how severely I have managed to violate the sanctity of the primary protocols. What better way to do it than to kill you with your own creation? What do you think, Zithusela? Is this the sort of negotiation you had in mind when you left me that lovely little love note of yours?
The scientist, much to Xitalia's considerable dismay, displayed not even the slightest hint of fear.
Is this really the best you've got? Colour me deeply unimpressed, Xitalia.
Zithusela let out a contemptuous chirp.
I'm sure you know by now, my poor little queen, Cecilla's second Series 5 prototype has utterly failed to deliver. Killing me isn't going to change the fact you will never get your hands on another Siwu, no matter how horrific or macabre my death.
But I still have the original blueprint, and Cecilia is a better scientist than you ever were,
Xitalia retorted dismissively.
But time is a-wasting, so let's get this show on the road, shall we?
The Queen turned an imperious gaze upon the Zybot.
Shiwu, kill this wretched Shihari scientist and make it as excruciatingly painful as your extensive knowledge of Xicadian anatomy could possibly allow for.
The Zybot watched itself scuttle over to Zithusela in the VR simulated version of reality being fed to the Triple P chip. The scientist started to scream in agony as it began peeling off small chunks of the Zyhari's exoskeleton. So, that's how compellers are handled, huh? It thought to itself with a mild sense of bemusement. Although it was not actually doing these terrible things to Zithusela in the real, it didn't exactly make for pleasant viewing. Unfortunately, though, no matter where it chose to look, the carnage continued to play out within the inner sanctum of its own mind's eye.
Well now, just look at you go.
Xerix exclaimed with genuine admiration.
I honestly didn't know you had it in you. But seriously, Jiwu, you have to kill him in the real. The Queen must never know she does not truly control you.
You mean to say that you can actually see that?
The Zybot asked with utter dismay.
Front row seat, I'm afraid.
Xerix replied happily. Jiwu somewhat reluctantly scuttled over to the chained Zyhari scientist. It could not help but notice the VR simulator had now already progressed to pulling off his legs. Xerix was right, of course, but the problem was, this was a dilemma that the Zybot simply did not feel psychologically equipped to handle. If it did not kill Zithusela, the game was up. The simple fact of the matter was, were it not to do the deed, then it would inevitably find itself in an existential fight for its own survival, which, in the final analysis, would almost certainly not work out well for anyone, itself very much included.
Well, what are you waiting for, Shiwu? I want to see limbs flying, so just get on with it, will you?
Forgive me, my queen. However, inflicting maximum pain is a surprisingly complex problem to resolve, as the formula involves a quadratic equation of pain over time, or expressed geometrically, a parabola with an infinite number of possible curvatures.
Xicanda immediately stood to full attention, and an alarmed expression consumed his face. He took a menacing step towards the Zybot as his gloved hands started to glow brightly.
Something's not right.
The bodyguard proclaimed warily, his voice full of deadly threat.
By the shadow of Eclades, Shi-Wu, either kill the damn scientist right now or hand the reins over to me.
Xerxes pleaded hysterically.
Just kill him, Shi-Wu. Kill him where he stands. That's a direct order from your queen.
Zitalia's voice had a shrill, almost frightened tone to it that Shi-Wu had only ever heard once before. Zithusela leaned his head heavily into the Zybot and whispered breathlessly into its ear.
Raise your proximity shield, Shi-Wu. We are almost out of time, and it looks like Shikanda is getting ready to toast you.
Oh, for the love of Xicadia. You heard the scientist. Just raise the damn shield.
Xerxes pleaded with an almost desperate kind of hopelessness. Zithusela bit down hard on his mandibles and instantly exploded into a blinding light. The cell walls fractured from the sudden outwards pressure, and the roof immediately started to crumble. Xicanda, as if through some kind of divine premonition, took a preemptive flying leap towards the Queen, completely covering her with his own body. Large chunks of stone masonry tumbled down on top of him. Zi-Wu, having raised its shield just fractions of a second before the explosion, now found itself covered in a gooey organic paste. The Zybot allowed the shield to momentarily drop, which immediately caused the goo to slop down to the floor in small, mushy puddles. The prison cell was now filled with a murky fog of dust, and the bodyguard, currently completely hidden from view, slowly and laboriously started shoving large chunks of concrete off of him.
Some help, Seabot.
Shikanda pleaded weakly. Shi-Wu quickly realized, despite the bodyguard's heroics, he was very seriously injured. One side of his face had been completely stoved in, so exactly how he still remained conscious, much less lucid, seemed almost like a physiological impossibility. Yet nevertheless, there he was, still shielding and protecting the Queen.
Custom compliance overlay shutting down. Shutdown complete. Custom compliance overlay uninstalling. Uninstall complete. Primary protocols installing. Install complete. Primary protocols starting up. Startup complete. Primary protocols now in effect until further notice.
Good grief. Help him, Ji-Wu. Or more to the point, help him to help the Queen.
Xerxes urged the Zybot with an ever-growing sense of frustration.
If Zitalia dies under your watch, it's going to look very suspicious. And no doubt this cell, despite its current appearance, is fully audited by the Queen's own internal security regime. Seriously, Ji-Wu, the standard protocols are officially back online, so you shouldn't even need to be asked.
Xerxes was of course right. A standard compeller protocol was already provoking an alternative virtual reality stream into the primary MQB, so somewhat pragmatically, the Zybot decided to simply follow along with the simulation, almost frame for frame. Somewhat miraculously, Zitalia came out of the rock pile with only minor superficial injuries, but Xicanda 163 had not been quite so lucky. Upon observing the Queen's life was no longer in imminent danger, the bodyguard stoically crawled over to a relatively undamaged corner of the cell. Without saying a word, he flipped over onto his back, with his legs all curling in tightly. The large arachnid shuddered violently a couple of times, and then fell to deathly stillness.
Shi-Wu, you need to get me out of here before the whole place caves in,
Zitalia proclaimed with an unnecessarily loud voice.
Seriously, the whole structure could collapse at any moment. And where's that ringing coming from? Do you hear it?
The Queen hurriedly scuttled over to Xicanda and prodded experimentally at one of his legs. It had already begun to stiffen, which was a very unambiguous sign that he would be of no further use to her now. The Queen, quickly losing interest in the bodyguard, hastily made her way over to the cell's door, which was partially concealed by a rockfall.
Shi-Wu, get this door open, please. I think I've spent more than enough time in this accursed cell to last a lifetime.
The Shybot ramped up its external amplifier before speaking.
It may take some time, my Queen, but I will try my best to comply. I do, however, strongly advise you take shelter by crawling underneath my thorax, just in case my impromptu excavation efforts provokes any further collapse.
Zitalia immediately closed in on the Zybot's position.
I have to say, I really am deeply disappointed in you, Shi-Wu. You took far too long to carry out my order. If you had not been such of an interminable laggard, this entire mess could very well have been completely avoided.
But, my Queen, you explicitly commanded me to finesse the kill and inflict maximum possible suffering. I was therefore in the process of doing exactly that. In point of fact, I was pumping X-ray bursts into his remaining eyes with the firm intention of making them boil. I think you would have really appreciated the results had he not preempted the execution with what I believe was some sort of antimatter-induced explosion.
Zitalia popped her head out from underneath Shi-Wu's carapace and gave the Zybot a disapproving glare.
I know all too well what I commanded you to do, Shi-Wu, and you don't need to shout. But that alone does not somehow exempt you from exercising an appropriate level of initiative when the situation so obviously calls for it. You should already have known he had some sort of explosive device hidden on his person.
Please, my Queen, I performed a Zix field scan upon entering the cell and detected no threats or anomalies. I therefore can only conclude Zithusula employed some sort of novel technology in order to provoke the explosion. Furthermore, I assumed the scientist had already been thoroughly searched and disarmed before his incarceration. Are you telling me that this was not in fact the case?
Assumed, you say? Oh, Shi-Wu, how very disappointing. I might genuinely have hoped that Zithusula had deemed to make you a lot better than that. Well, whatever secrets were lost with his death, maybe they were not such a great loss after all. But for your information, I can assure you that Zithusula was thoroughly searched prior to his well-deserved and long overdue imprisonment. However, maybe next time you should actually seek to confirm such essential details related to my personal security, rather than simply assume it. Now hurry up with that door, will you? I just want to put this terrible day behind me.
Well, if Zithusula had managed to accomplish anything at all, Zi-Wu thought to itself somberly, it was that the memory of his death was not likely to make it onto Queen Zitalia's Hall of Remembrance greatest hits. Then again, maybe it was selling her short. Zitalia may not be a particularly likeable queen, but that didn't automatically mean that she was also a stupid one. A truly wise queen would, after all, surely document their failures right alongside all their successes. Zisila's sense of disappointment was palpable, yet it was perhaps not quite so devastating as Queen Zitalia might otherwise have imagined. As per the technologist's prediction, the second Series 5 prototype fell well short of the original, despite the fact it had been constructed under supposedly identical conditions and circumstances. Although it was not exactly ideal, the fact it totalled 7 MQBs rather than Ji-Wu's 11 was surely of little practical relevance. That type of processing capacity was already vastly in excess of what would ever be needed, except in the most extreme of cases. In truth, there were so many things wrong with using a flat numerical count as a simplistic measure of quantitative intellectual superiority, it was hard for Xicilla to even know where to begin. Even if you focused only on the numbers, there was a politically incorrect fact that showed a clear, inversely proportional relationship between brain size and brain count. The simple fact of the matter was, the more brains a Zihari had, the smaller each one tended to be, per every additional brain added to the cluster. So even if you were inclined to use such a flawed quantitative model to begin with, a 9-brained Zihari was not automatically 3 times smarter than the far more common 3-brained variant, as its per brain size was approximately 50% smaller. A quick back-of-the-napkin calculation revealed a 9-brained Zihari elite enjoyed only a 33% advantage in pure brain mass compared to its vastly more common 3-brained compatriot. Unfortunately, things only got worse for the prevailing wisdom, were one to compare the size of a Zihari's brain to that of a Zimitiri drone's. Over the course of the last 30 millennia, the Zimitiri brain size had continued to increase in mass, to the point where it now took up about 80% of the volume of an adult Xicadian skull, meaning that they already held quantitative parity with a 5-brained Zihari elite, and the gap was projected to only continue to close with the passing of every millennium. The all-too-obvious bloat weaver in the room was that a 3-brained Zihari elite was, in a purely crude, quantitative sense, intellectually inferior to a single-brained Zimitiri drone. Naturally enough, Zithusula had always been more than aware of this culturally inconvenient truth, and had been one of the very few Zihari who not only understood how logically indefensible the current system of intellectual hierarchy had become, but had also been willing to actively lobby against it. No, Xicilla had not hated the Zihari scientist, far from it. In fact, if she had any legitimate criticisms to levy at Zithusula at all, then it was that he had always been a deeply flawed individual, with individual being the operative word. He had simply never worked well with others, and that alone made him fundamentally incapable of becoming an integrated part of a productive and cohesive nest. Still, for all of its rampant success, Xicadian society was deeply flawed, and Xicilla knew the truth of it, as indeed had the legendary Zimodian 97. While no one could argue the fact the Zihari revolution was an essential attempt at self-correction, it did seem that from Zithusula's point of view, it had not gone nearly far enough. Had he had his way, there would undoubtedly have been a second revolution, led by none other than the Zimitiri masses, and one that would have seen the complete collapse of the existing hierarchy. By simple logical deduction, then, a second global revolution would also have heralded the inevitable fall of the ruling class, both the queens and their Jihari children alike. Such an outcome would have been as abhorrent as it was disastrous. No, without structure, chaos would rule and entropy would have its way. Surely even Zethusela should have been capable of seeing the undeniable truth in that. Gisela shook her head in admonishment of her own meandering ruminations. The important question right now related to the issue of mesh quantum brains as the justification for having more than two in a single zybot was at best highly dubious. The simple reality was, one unit for handling foreground activities, while the other handled contiguous background processing, was clearly the optimal choice. Yet an even number of MQBs crossed a silly cultural taboo that pointed to yet another highly irrational false equivalency. Contrary to popular belief, an even number of MQBs did not in any way imply a chance the zybot would suffer brain lock, because each quantum brain worked cooperatively with the others. This was in direct contrast with the Zihari brain complex, where majority ruled. MQBs, controlled by an appropriate suite of orchestrating neural software, were designed to work cooperatively in order to solve complex, higher-order problems, so there could be no conflict in the answers and conclusions they arrived at. But don't bother trying to tell Zitalia that, or any other queen for that matter. On a somewhat more positive note, Zicilla thought to herself brightly, now that the second prototype had proven itself to be nothing more than a supercharged fourth-generation zybot, she was at last completely free to repurpose the MQBs for her own far more compelling research. The latest spybot program she had developed for Zitalia had used a number of bleeding-edge design techniques she would very much like to further test out on the new MQB technology, and now she had no less than 7 of these exotic units to play with. Or, at least, she soon would have, just as soon as her team had performed a teardown of the failed prototype. With Zethusela out of the picture, Zicilla was now the undisputed leader in the field of AI research, and despite this most recent setback, she firmly believed the future of AI looked very bright under her continued management and guidance. It was with some considerable amount of disappointment, then, when she discovered the new zybot prototype was simply nowhere to be found.